The House comes to questions for oral answer. And question number 1 is in the name of Todd McClay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Finance, how will the budget continue the government's ongoing program to deliver jobs and growth for the New Zealand economy?
Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, the government will build on the government's 4 priorities for this term, including responsibly managing the government's finances and building a more productive and competitive economy to deliver jobs and growth. Over the last 4.5 years, we've taken a number of steps towards those priorities, including reducing company tax, reducing tax on work and saving, increasing tax on consumption and property, cutting red tape for business, getting the government's own finances in shape to keep interest rates lower and take pressure off the exchange rate. The budget will continue the practice over the last 4 budgets of consistently investing in new infrastructure, in science and innovation, in our schools and in healthcare, and continue to provide further reduction in business costs.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Todd McClay.
To the Minister, what reports has he received on employment and wage growth in the New Zealand economy?
Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, we've received moderately positive reports last week through the Quarterly Employment Survey and the Household Labour Force Survey. Unemployment fell to 6.2% in the March quarter, with 15,000 fewer people unemployed, at the same time as there was an increase in the labour market participation rate. The QES shows around 30,000 more jobs in the last year and 50,000 more jobs in the last 2 years. Weekly earnings increased by 2.5% in the year to March, with the largest increase in manufacturing, where apparently there is a crisis, but earnings went up 4.3%. This compared to an increase in the cost of living of less than 1% over the same period.
Supplementary question, Todd McClay.
How does growth in New Zealand compare to the outlook in Australia?
Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, well, it's reasonably similar, despite the fact that Australia is benefiting from the highest terms of trade it has seen in many generations. Economic growth in Australia is forecast at around 3% over the next 4 years, which means that Australia is expected to do better than most of the developed world. This is encouraging because Australia is our largest trading partner and we are expecting comparable growth in New Zealand. However, we are focused on what we need to do here in New Zealand, and tomorrow's budget will confirm that we are on track.
Supplementary question, Honourable David Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is the reason he is no longer saying that he is, quotes, sticking to a plan that's working because 200,000 people have left for Australia and only 8,000 of the 170,000 jobs he promised at the last election have been created?
Honourable Bill English.
No, Mr. Speaker, we are sticking to a plan that's working. With respect to jobs, there's no doubt that the 2012 job growth was weaker than we would have liked, and certainly weaker than those who are looking for new jobs would have liked. However, the prospects for job growth have picked up in 2013, and I guess that's the point. We're better to stick to a plan that involves expanding our productive sector and our exports and our savings, and not take up a plan to spend more, tax more and throttle our export industries, which is the Labor Greens plan.
Supplementary question, Andrew Williams.
Supplementary to the Minister. Is it part of the government's growth strategy to achieve pay parity with Australia, given that the earnings gap with Australia has increased by $58.18 under this national government?
Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, yes, we still do. We still are aiming, and I would expect New Zealand governments will, for the next decade, to close the earning gaps with Australia. It's telling that in last night's budget, Australia put off some of its tax increases for tax cuts for several years, which mean that the closing gap in real after-tax incomes is likely to be closing a bit more over the next couple of years because our policy remains on track.
Supplementary question, Honourable Peter Sharples.
To the Minister, given that Māori are disproportionately affected across unemployment, how will the budget reduce Māori unemployment?
Well, Mr. Speaker,
Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, in the first place, because the growth prospects in the economy look pretty positive, and in the most recent employment figures, Māori unemployment began to drop. Secondly, because the government has invested in this budget $43 million over the next 4 years, which is a major expansion of Māori and Pacifica trades training of 3,000 places. And I want to give due credit to the Minister for his strong advocacy for this policy.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Andrew Williams.
Supplementary to the Minister. Does the Minister concede that the only real growth under this government has been the growth in the numbers of New Zealanders going to Australia?
Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, no. And of course, as the member I think probably knows, the number of New Zealanders going to Australia is generally related to the difference in growth rates. So when we had a recession and Australia didn't, more New Zealanders went to Australia. Now the gap between our growth rates has closed right up. I think you would expect to see the outflow reduce reasonably substantially over the next 4 or 5 years.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Andrew Williams.
Supplementary to the Minister. What does he say to the 11% of 20 to 24-year-olds who, after 4 years under this government, are still yet to see any of the jobs and growth promised by this government?
Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, I would say to them that we can now look to the future with some optimism. They have unfortunately had to, in their time since leaving school, bear the burden of one of the worst recessions in a generation, but compared to young people in almost any other developed country, their prospects are positive and we're right behind them.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Todd McClay.
To the Minister, what recent reports has he received about the government's economic program?
Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, just overnight the IMF put out its country report on New Zealand, and that report is very favourable, or is favourable. I wouldn't say very favourable, but is favourable about the approach that the New Zealand government has taken to the management of the economy, and particularly to the management of the government books. In fact, they believe that the speed at which we have reduced our deficit and headed to surplus is about right, and that the actions the government has taken are reinforcing the growth prospects for the economy.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Andrew Williams.
Supplementary to the Minister of Finance. What does he say to the people of Northland who have an unemployment rate of 10% overall, and in the case of young Maori?
Order. Allow the minister to the member to ask his question.
Could I repeat the question?
The member can start his question again.
What does he say to the people of Northland who have an unemployment rate of 10%, and in the case of young Maori, it's 2 or 3 times that level? And what does he say to them in terms of what jobs and growth will they get promised from this government?
Honourable Bill
Mr.
English.
Speaker, I think we would say to them that they will benefit from government policies which would do 2 things. One is build a highway north of Auckland up to the north, and the second thing is to support the government's oil and gas program in the north, and that they should not support political parties who are trying to stop the highway to the north and who are trying to stop the oil and gas program, because Labor and the Greens and the Mana Party are trying to destroy jobs in Northland, not create them.
Supplementary.
Order. Supplementary question, Andrew Williams.
Order. So how can he give these series of answers when, under this government, the number of children living in benefit-dependent households has increased by 32,000?
Honourable Bill English, as far as
well,
he's
Mr.
responsible.
Speaker, in the first place, there was an increase in benefit numbers when we had a recession. I might say that was in contrast to what was going on under the previous government, where even though the economy was booming, benefit numbers went up. And the government's welfare reforms and housing reforms are focused strongly on reducing that dependency, and there'll be more evidence of that in the budget tomorrow.
Question number 2, Materia Ture.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Economic Development.